We have an inflationary crisis and a housing supply shortage. Why doesn't the Prime Minister have a plan to get houses built?
We will take no lessons from the Conservative Party of Canada when it comes to investing in housing.
If this Prime Minister is not to blame, then exactly what is causing this housing price inflation?
One has to at least recognize that the Conservatives are consistent in their approach and that they want to do less whenever they're confronted with a problem.
Lots of talk this week about housing and inflation because it continues to dominate the political debate. Is this a preview of more of what's to come, and what do Canadians actually want or need to hear? It's Thursday. I'm here with At Issue, Chantal Hébert, Andrew Coyne, Althea Raj, and Elamine Abdul-Mahmoud joins us this week too. So this is, the first week and a bit now we've been back, and I know we have talked about inflation, but it does seem to still, at least for the Conservatives, they're trying to make this sort of the dominant issue inside the House as well. Andrew, you've written a lot about it. I know you like to talk about it. What do you make of how the Conservatives are using it and how the government's responding?
Well, the Conservatives are using it, I think, partly because polling will show that people are extremely concerned about it. People don't like inflation. They find it unnerving. And the higher it gets, the more unnerved they get. The government, I don't think, has a good answer, but I don't think the opposition has a really clear questioning line either on this. It's one thing to talk about what we should do next, and it's very clear that the Bank of Canada has to act now to prevent this sort of beachhead of inflation from spreading, from becoming entrenched, becoming embedded in people's expectations, and particularly starting to show up in wage demands. And the government, in terms of its fiscal power, the deficit can do a lot to sort of buttress that credibility by starting to bring the deficit down. That's all well and good, but what Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives are talking about is what's happened over the last 18 months, and they're blaming all of the inflation that we've seen on government monetary and fiscal policy. That's much less clear that that's at fault, and what's really unclear is what they would have done differently. Would they not have run the deficits that the government did? Would they have prevented the Bank of Canada, or did they disapprove of the Bank of Canada having helped to finance that? They don't really seem to talk about that a lot, and I think that's the weakness in the Conservative argument.
Yeah, Althea, though, I wonder if it is resonating, though, because this is something that people feel and are talking about around the dinner table and everywhere else.
Well, it's hard not to notice it when you go to the grocery store or when you fill up your car at the gas pump, or even if you're addicted to realtor.ca like I am, and you notice that, yes, it's true, the prices of homes have gone up 18% year over year. I agree entirely with what Andrew said. I think what is interesting is that the Conservatives themselves are not actually sure. They know they want to hit on inflation. They know people are worried about it, but they're not sure what their lines of attack are. So last week, it was all about the price of food, and then the government's response was, well, these are global supply chain problems, and this is not something that Canada itself is experiencing alone. And now it's all about, well, it's the price of land that has gone up, as if the price of homes is entirely due to the fact that the government sent CERB to almost everybody across the country. So to Andrew's point, and I think he's right, the Conservatives don't have a clear answer. What is it that you would do differently? And not just what would you have done in the past differently, but what would you do in the future differently? And even that itself is not clear within the Conservative caucus as well. Yeah,
they're sort of shifting their talking points and their targets a fair bit. Elamine, what do you make of how the government is responding by talking about things like housing and childcare?
I mean, listen, one thing that keeps popping up, for example, on TikTok is that there are global supply problems that are causing, goods to go up. So I feel like that's something that at this point, even the Conservative Party is fairly familiar with. One thing that they're not addressing is the fact that their platform itself also promised to spend quite a bit of money. So if they're going to come after the Liberals for, increasing inflation by spending a lot, then the one thing that doesn't add up is like, well, so that was also your plan. In fact, your plan was to run a higher deficit. And that is something that they're not answering yet. I assume that's why they can't keep hitting on this note. It is a note that people are feeling right now when they're trying to buy Christmas presents and everything is costing a little bit higher. But at no point have they explained how, the government's supposed to make it rain in Brazil or something like open some ports that are currently closed. And of course, because they can't answer that question.
Chantal, what do you make of how this argument is evolving?
Well, it's a global issue, and I'm not talking about inflation. I'm talking about opposition tactics. It's not just happening in Canada that the government in place is being blamed. Today, I think Joe Biden was saying, well, look at inflation in Canada and Europe, which sounded like a line from question period. I think the Conservatives are taking a gamble in the sense that they are playing the long game. We're not going to have an election tomorrow. We don't know how the economy is going to turn out 6 or 8 months from now. One thing for sure, the government is not going to be resolving inflation from the exchange you played before we started by building houses, because houses don't get built overnight. But that is a gamble that they're taking. And in as much as there are many levers at play that the federal government has no hands on, it's a fair gamble to take for an opposition party. Take wage increases. If you're going to have labor shortages, you are going to see wage increases. And the federal government cannot suddenly bring in armies of workers to prevent that. It's already happening. So I would say let's check back on this in about 4 or 5 months.
Althea, I'll give you the last word on this.
I think the risk for the government is that it gets wrapped up and these discussions that are more theoretical and philosophical and policy discussions, and they don't sound like they're connected to real people. And so they cannot forget when they're answering questions from the Conservatives on this issue that they have to show empathy, because people are actually concerned. And this is not about whether or not you should, for real people, it's not about lowering the debt or the deficit. It's about the fact that broccoli is costing $5, and when the Chrystia Freeland, who's answering these questions, kind of takes a condescending tone, I think that is a win for the Conservatives.
And that's the danger here. Of course, there is a fiscal and economic update coming. We learned today on December 14th, so maybe that'll give us a picture too.
All those opposed to the motion will please say nay. There being no dissenting voice, I declare the motion carried.
A rare moment this week inside the House of Commons after MPs unanimously voted to fast-track the government's updated bill banning the practice of conversion therapy in Canada. So what does this tell us about how Parliament can work together? What were the politics at play behind the scenes? Chantal, Andrew, Althea, and Elamine back for another round of At Issue. I'll start with you on this one, Chantal. The Liberals and the NDP were both caught off guard that this happened. And obviously it was welcome from those two sides. What did you make of how this unfolded, and maybe what was the motivation politically behind it?
I think it was a smart play on the part of the Conservatives, and up to a point a risky one. A similar bill last spring, as you remember, saw 62 Conservative MPs vote against, and it was a lighter bill, to 51, including Aaron O'Toole, voting for it. So the risk to the Conservatives is that they moved the notion that all this should happen in one day, and that could not have happened unless everyone agreed. And so the risk was it only took one person to kind of trip up Aaron O'Toole and his caucus on this. And we would be talking about that today. So that kind of shows a caucus unity in a way that I think no other party in the House of Commons expected from the Conservatives. For one, the main argument for why that happened, there were a number. The first is a lot of people have had their say in the Conservative caucus over conversion therapy last spring. The second, this battle has been fought and lost. It will be lost in the end. Strangely enough, I think the third reason, the bill is tougher. The previous bill did not include consenting adults. It bans conversion therapy entirely. This version probably opens the bill up for legal challenges that the previous one did not, and that battle will be fought or lost in the courts. Finally, the way this happened yesterday, no one had to vote in a way that went against how they voted last spring. That's the only thing you needed to do was, I'm trying to say this politely, keep your lips zipped.
Which is hard for politicians. So, and especially if you feel passionately about this, and many Conservatives do. Althea, did it surprise you too that Aaron O'Toole managed to get everybody to agree to this, or to keep it quiet, as Chantal says?
I think it was politically astute. Is it surprising? yes. It's not as surprising when you start actually talking to members of the Conservative caucus. So they obviously talked about this on Wednesday. The bill, yes, is tougher, as Chantal mentioned, in that consenting adults, so the state is telling you that you cannot do something, even if you want to do it, is preventing you from accessing this so-called service. But one of the concerns that the pro-life members of the Conservative caucus had was that they felt that the language was vague about whether or not you could have a discussion with your priest or counselor. And actually, the Liberals tightened that language to causing another person to undergo conversion therapy. So for some, they felt that that concern was actually addressed. So while the Liberals have been using this bill as a wedge issue for the past year, and were really, I mean, let's be frank, they were hoping to use it against the Conservatives again. I think what this shows is that actually the bill gave them an olive branch and they've latched onto it. And also that Aaron O'Toole has a very firm grip on his caucus. And the fact that he's appointed 80 people to his shadow cabinet and he has the loyalty of them actually has some people scared in caucus that they will be shown to the door if they vote in a way that they would like to vote. And so it is very interesting what's happening in social conservative circles this evening. Can I just add that the fight is not over because it goes to the Senate and the Conservatives actually have a representation in the Senate. So on the adult accessing this service, I would be surprised if the Senate decides to, give this royal assent as quickly as the House did.
Elamine, what did you make of it from Toronto there?
I mean, it's certainly a really elegant way for Aaron O'Toole to change the channel on the questions about his leadership and how, firm a grip he has on the rest of his caucus. There were questions as recently as a couple of weeks ago about whether he would be able to sort of convince his caucus on a few issues in terms of bringing the party closer to the middle, which is where he would like it to be. This is exactly the test case for it. And the fact that there are no headlines, or at least like very few headlines, even mentioning any opposition inside the Conservative Party with regards to this issue, like that's the win. That's the win, is the fact that they changed the channel, at least on that front.
Yeah, the headlines were positive for the Conservative Party today, and it, as Chantal pointed out, it didn't have to go that way. Andrew?
Anytime you see unanimity in Parliament, it usually means that somebody's decided to punt some of the legal issues. So yes, there will probably be constitutional challenges of this coming up, and you had an alignment of expediency and principle behind this bill. I think it's interesting to pair this with our previous discussion about the economy and inflation. And I think I'll come back to a point I made in the previous panel. I think what's going on in the Conservative circles is not just about Aaron O'Toole, it's about a critical mass within the party and within the caucus, where he had to give some concessions to the right wing of the party coming out of that election, coming out of his bouncing back and forth in terms of his own positioning. But the concession, I think the decision that's been made is, I'll give you more room on the right on the economy, but you got to cool it down on the culture war issues. If you want to have a more right of center party, you can do so on things like inflation and the deficit, but we're going to put some of these really divisive culture war issues that are losing issues to the Conservatives. We're going to put those to one side. And I think that's what you're seeing emerging with the Conservative Party.
Interesting. Last word to Chantal.
Oof. I'm not sure that giving in to going further to the right on fiscal issues is the best line to take if you're going to go in an election. But I'm guessing if you're fighting to save your leadership, it's not a bad move.
Okay, got to leave it there. That was a good one, everyone. Thank you.